The helicopter blades cut through the thick Afghan air as Lieutenant Sarah Chen adjusted her headset for the third time in 10 minutes. Her hands moved with practiced precision across the control panel, but her mind wandered to the conversation she had overheard earlier that morning. The Navy SEALs stationed at Forward Operating Base Shank had started calling her Falcon during her first week of deployment, and she still wasn't sure how to feel about it. Sarah had earned her wings as a helicopter pilot after grueling years of training that pushed her physical and mental limits beyond what she thought possible. She was one of only 12 women selected for the elite aviation program that year, and the pressure to prove herself had been relentless. Every maneuver had to be perfect, every landing flawless, every decision calculated and precise. The instructors watched her more closely than the male candidates, waiting for any sign of weakness or hesitation. But Sarah thrived under pressure. She had learned that lesson early in life, growing up as the daughter of two immigrants who had sacrificed everything to give their children opportunities they never had. Her father worked double shifts at a textile factory while her mother cleaned office buildings at night. They spoke little English when they first arrived from Taiwan, but they understood the language of hard work and determination. The nickname Falcon had started during a particularly challenging mission 3 weeks into her deployment. A team of SEALs had been pinned down by enemy fire in a valley 30 miles northeast of the base. The terrain was treacherous, with jagged rocks and unpredictable wind patterns that made flying dangerous even for experienced pilots. Several attempts to extract the team had failed when other aircraft couldn't maintain stable flight in the harsh conditions. Sarah had volunteered to try when the mission commander was considering calling off the rescue attempt until morning. She knew the SEALs couldn't wait that long. Enemy forces were closing in, and their ammunition was running low. The narrow window of opportunity was closing fast. She had approached the landing zone with surgical precision, her Black Hawk helicopter dancing through the rocky canyon like it was performing a choreographed routine. The wind tried to slam her aircraft against the cliff walls, but Sarah compensated with micro-adjustments that seemed to anticipate each gust before it hit. Her co-pilot, a seasoned warrant officer named Martinez, had watched in amazement as she threaded the helicopter through spaces that seemed impossibly tight. The extraction had taken less than 4 minutes. Sarah had kept the helicopter steady while the wounded SEALs were loaded aboard, even as enemy fire peppered the ground around them. When they finally lifted off, one of the rescued operators had looked at her with something approaching reverence and said, "You fly like a damn falcon, ma'am." Precise and deadly. The name stuck. Within days, everyone on the base was calling her Falcon. Sarah had mixed feelings about the nickname. On one hand, she appreciated that it reflected her flying skills rather than focusing on her gender. Too many female pilots were given cute or diminutive nicknames that undermined their authority. But there was something about the way some of the SEALs said it that made her wonder if they truly understood what they were calling her. Falcons were hunters, she knew. They were apex predators with incredible eyesight and lightning-fast reflexes. But they were also solitary creatures, fierce and independent. Sarah had always identified with that aspect of the bird's nature. She had spent most of her military career proving that she could handle anything thrown at her way, often working twice as hard as her male colleagues to earn half the recognition. Her thoughts were interrupted by a crackling voice over the radio. "Falcon, this is command. We have a situation developing approximately 15 clicks southwest of your current position. A convoy has been hit by an IED, and we have multiple casualties requiring immediate medical evacuation." Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She banked the helicopter toward the coordinates being transmitted while her crew prepared the cabin for wounded soldiers. The familiar surge of adrenaline sharpened her focus, pushing aside any lingering doubts or distractions. This was what she had trained for, what she lived for. The flight to the ambush site took 12 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Sarah could see smoke rising from the desert floor as she approached, and her heart sank when she spotted the twisted remains of the lead vehicle in the convoy. The explosion had been devastating, leaving a crater in the road that spoke to the size and sophistication of the improvised explosive device. As she circled the area, Sarah assessed the tactical situation with the cool analytical mind that had made her such an effective pilot. Enemy fighters were positioned in the hills overlooking the road, using the elevated terrain to rain down fire on the trapped convoy. The soldiers on the ground had taken cover behind their remaining vehicles, but their position was untenable. They needed immediate extraction, not just medical evacuation. Sarah keyed her radio and spoke with the calm authority that had become her trademark. "Command, this is Falcon. The LZ is hot, and the convoy is under heavy fire. Recommend immediate close air support before attempting medical evacuation." The response came back quickly. "Falcon, close air support is 15 minutes out. Can you maintain position and provide situation reports?" Sarah looked down at the soldiers below, some of whom were clearly wounded and in desperate need of medical attention. 15 minutes was too long. In combat, every second could mean the difference between life and death. She had a choice to make, and she knew that whatever decision she reached would define not just this mission, but her reputation and career. The enemy fire was intensifying, and she could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions in the surrounding hills. Her helicopter was armed, but engaging ground targets while maintaining a stable platform for medical evacuation would require flying skills that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. It would be dangerous, potentially suicidal, but Sarah had never backed down from a challenge. She thought about the SEALs back at the base, the ones who had given her the nickname Falcon. They trusted her to get them home when the situation looked impossible. More importantly, she trusted herself. Her father had always told her that true strength wasn't about never falling down, but about getting back up every time you were knocked down. Today, she would prove that she deserved every ounce of respect that nickname carried. Sarah took a deep breath and made her decision. She was about to show everyone exactly what kind of Falcon she really was. Sarah dropped the helicopter into a steep dive that made her co-pilot Martinez grab his restraints with white knuckles. The Blackhawk screamed toward the desert floor at a rate that would have terrified most pilots, but Sarah's hands remained steady on the controls. She was executing a maneuver that existed more in theory than practice, something she had read about in advanced tactical flying manuals but never attempted in real combat conditions. The enemy fighters in the hills had expected the helicopter to maintain a safe distance while calling for backup. They weren't prepared for a direct assault from an aircraft that should have been focused on medical evacuation. Sarah's aggressive approach caught them completely off guard, and she used that confusion to her advantage. At 500 feet above the ground, she pulled the helicopter into a sharp turn that brought her main guns to bear on the largest concentration of enemy positions. Her door gunners opened fire with devastating accuracy, their training and her stable flight platform combining to create a lethal combination. The surprise attack scattered the enemy fighters, buying precious time for the soldiers on the ground. But Sarah wasn't finished. Instead of pulling back to a safe distance, she continued her attack run, weaving between the hills like a predator hunting its prey. The helicopter moved with an agility that seemed to defy physics, dancing through the valleys and ridges with precision that left even her experienced crew speechless. She was flying on instinct now, her conscious mind stepping aside to let muscle memory and thousands of hours of training take control. The enemy tried to regroup and return fire, but Sarah anticipated their movements with an almost supernatural awareness. She would appear from behind one ridge just long enough to suppress a firing position, then disappear behind another before they could lock onto her aircraft. Her tactics were unorthodox, dangerous, and absolutely brilliant. Martinez found his voice over the intercom. "Jesus Christ, Falcon. Where did you learn to fly like that?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. She was too focused on setting up her next attack run, but the question triggered a flood of memories that she had buried deep inside her mind. Images flashed through her consciousness like frames from an old movie reel, taking her back to a time and place that felt like another lifetime. She was 8 years old again, standing in her grandmother's small apartment in Taipei during her family's last visit to Taiwan. Her grandmother, whom everyone called Nai Nai, had been telling stories about their family history, tales that Sarah's parents rarely discussed. Most of the stories were gentle reminiscences about life in the old country, but one conversation had stayed with Sarah throughout her life. Nai Nai had pulled out a small wooden box from beneath her bed and opened it carefully, revealing a collection of yellowed photographs and documents written in Chinese characters. Among them was a small silver pin shaped like a diving bird, its wings spread wide as if frozen in mid-flight. "Your great-grandmother was a very special woman," Nai had said in her broken English, holding the pin up to catch the light from the window. "During the war, when the Japanese came, she was part of the resistance. They called her Laoing." Sarah had asked what that meant, and her grandmother's eyes had grown distant with memory. "It means old eagle in English, but that doesn't capture the true meaning. In Chinese, Laoing represents something more than just a bird. It represents someone who protects their family and their people, no matter the cost. Someone who strikes from the sky with precision and courage." The story had unfolded slowly over that afternoon. Sarah's great-grandmother had been a radio operator and intelligence gatherer for the Chinese resistance during World War II. She would climb into the mountains with her equipment, sometimes for weeks at a time, tracking Japanese troop movements and coordinating attacks. The Japanese had hunted her relentlessly, but she always seemed to vanish into the landscape before they could catch her. She could read the mountains like a book, Nai had explained. Every ridge, every valley, every cave. She knew where to hide, where to strike, and when to disappear. The resistance fighters said she could see enemy movements from miles away, like an eagle circling high above its prey. Sarah had been fascinated by these stories, but her parents had always discouraged too much talk about the past. They were focused on building a new life in America, and dwelling on old conflicts seemed counterproductive. It wasn't until years later, when she was struggling through flight school, that she began to understand why those stories had resonated so deeply with her. Now, flying through the Afghan mountains while under enemy fire, Sarah felt a connection to her great-grandmother that transcended time and distance. She understood instinctively how to read the terrain, how to use the landscape to her advantage, and how to strike with surgical precision. It wasn't just training or natural ability. It was something deeper, something that flowed through her bloodline like an inherited gift. The enemy fire began to slacken as Sarah's relentless assault took its toll. She had systematically eliminated or suppressed every major firing position, creating a bubble of safety around the trapped convoy. The soldiers on the ground were already moving to secure a landing zone, working with the efficient urgency of men who knew their window of opportunity was limited. Sarah brought the helicopter down in a controlled descent that would have been challenging even under peaceful conditions. The landing zone was little more than a cleared patch of desert between two burned-out vehicles, with barely enough space for her rotor blades to clear the obstacles. But she touched down with the gentleness of a feather, her wheels making contact with the sand as smoothly as if she were landing on a regulation helipad. The medical evacuation proceeded with clockwork efficiency. The wounded soldiers were loaded aboard while Sarah kept the engines running, ready to lift off at a moment's notice if the enemy renewed their attack. Her crew worked with practiced precision, their confidence in her flying abilities allowing them to focus entirely on their medical duties. As the last casualty was secured in the cabin, Sarah received word that the close air support had finally arrived. A pair of Apache gunships appeared on the horizon, their intimidating profiles promising swift retribution for anyone foolish enough to continue the fight. But their arrival felt almost anticlimactic after what Sarah had accomplished with her solo assault. The flight back to the base was tense but uneventful. Sarah maintained radio contact with the base medical team, relaying vital signs and injury assessments so that the doctors could be prepared for each patient. Her voice remained calm and professional throughout the flight, giving no indication of the incredible feat of flying she had just accomplished. It wasn't until they touched down at Forward Operating Base Shank that Sarah allowed herself to process what had happened. As the medical team rushed the casualties to the field hospital, she sat in the cockpit for a moment, her hands still gripping the controls. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, replaced by a profound sense of satisfaction and purpose. Martinez turned to her with an expression of awe and confusion. "Falcon, I've been flying for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like that. How did you know exactly where they would be? How did you anticipate their movements like that?" Sarah smiled quietly as she began the post-flight checklist, but she didn't answer the question directly. How could she explain that she had felt the presence of her great-grandmother guiding her through those mountains? How could she tell him that she had inherited not just a nickname, but a legacy of courage and precision that stretched back through generations of strong women who had faced impossible odds? The truth was something she was only beginning to understand herself. Word of Sarah's heroic rescue spread through the base faster than wildfire in dry grass. By evening, every soldier, contractor, and officer had heard some version of the story about the pilot who single-handedly took on an entire enemy position to save a trapped convoy. The details grew more dramatic with each telling, but the core facts remained unchanged. Falcon had done the impossible. The SEALs who had first given her the nickname gathered in the mess tent that night, their usual boisterous conversation subdued by genuine respect. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, the team leader who had been extracted from the valley 3 weeks earlier, approached Sarah as she finished her meal. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology," he said, his voice carrying an unusual note of humility for a special operations veteran. "When we started calling you Falcon, I thought it was just because you flew fast and hit your targets. I didn't understand that we were dealing with something much more serious." Sarah looked up from her tray, surprised by the formal tone. "What do you mean, Sergeant?" Rodriguez pulled up a chair and sat down across from her. "I've been in special ops for 12 years. I've worked with pilots from every branch of service, and I've seen some incredible flying. But what you did today wasn't just skill or training. That was something else entirely." Other SEALs began to gather around the table, drawn by the gravity in their team leader's voice. These were men who had seen combat in every corner of the globe, warriors who didn't impress easily. But they were looking at Sarah with something approaching reverence. "We did some checking after your first rescue," Rodriguez continued. "Talked to your instructors, your previous commanding officers, other pilots who had served with you. They all said the same thing. You don't just fly helicopters. You become one with them. Like the aircraft is an extension of your own body." Sarah felt uncomfortable with the attention but couldn't deny the accuracy of his observation. Flying had always felt natural to her in a way that was difficult to explain to others. From her first time at the controls, the complex mechanical systems had seemed intuitive, as if she had been born understanding their language. "My grandmother used to tell me stories," Sarah said quietly, surprising herself by sharing something so personal with virtual strangers. "About my great-grandmother during World War II. She was in the Chinese resistance, fighting against the Japanese occupation." The SEALs leaned in closer, recognizing the significance of the moment. In their world, family military history was sacred, a connection to something larger than individual service. "They called her Laoing," Sarah continued. "It means old eagle in English, but in Chinese it carries more meaning. It represents someone who protects their people from above, who strikes with precision and disappears before the enemy can respond." Rodriguez nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. "That's why you fly the way you do. It's not just training. It's in your blood." Sarah had never articulated it quite that way, but she knew he was right. The connection she felt to her aircraft, the instinctive understanding of terrain and tactics, the ability to anticipate enemy movements, these weren't skills she had learned in flight school. They were gifts passed down through generations of women who had faced impossible odds and found ways to overcome them. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel William Hayes, the base commander. The mess tent fell silent as the colonel approached their table, his expression serious but not unfriendly. Sarah started to stand, but he waved her back down. "As you were, Lieutenant. I'm not here for formalities." Hayes pulled up a chair and joined the circle. "I just got off a secure call with Pentagon brass. They're very interested in what happened today." Sarah felt a chill of apprehension. In her experience, Pentagon attention was rarely a good thing for junior officers, especially those who deviated from standard operating procedures. "Sir, I followed proper tactical protocols given the circumstances on the ground," she said carefully. Hayes smiled, the first time she had seen him show any warmth since arriving at the base. "Relax, Lieutenant. You're not in trouble. Quite the opposite, actually. The Joint Chiefs are recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross. And there's talk of fast-tracking your promotion to captain." The SEALs around the table erupted in congratulations, but Sarah felt oddly disconnected from the celebration. Awards and promotions were nice, but they weren't why she had become a pilot. She had joined the military to serve, to protect others, to honor the legacy of courage that her family had passed down to her. Hayes continued, more importantly, they want to know if you'd be interested in joining a new program they're developing. Special Operations Aviation, working directly with elite units on high-priority missions. Before Sarah could respond, Rodriguez spoke up. Sir, with respect, she already is Special Operations Aviation. What she did today proves that. The colonel nodded thoughtfully. That's exactly what I told them, Sergeant. Which is why I recommended that instead of transferring her to some experimental program, they should study what makes her so effective and use that knowledge to improve training for other pilots. Sarah appreciated the colonel's support, but something in his words troubled her. Sir, I don't think what I do can be taught in a traditional sense. It's not about new techniques or advanced equipment. Then, what is it about? Hayes asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Sarah thought carefully about her answer. She could give them the technical explanation about spatial awareness and aircraft familiarity. She could talk about the importance of staying calm under pressure and trusting your instincts. But those would be incomplete answers, missing the most important element. It's about understanding your purpose, she said finally. Every time I get in that cockpit, I'm not just flying a machine. I'm carrying on a tradition of protection and service that goes back generations. My great-grandmother fought from the mountains. I fight from the sky. The tools are different, but the mission is the same. The men around the table listened in respectful silence, recognizing wisdom that went deeper than military doctrine or tactical training. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, a knowing smile crossing his face. That's why we called you Falcon. We thought it was about how you flew, but it was really about who you are. Sarah realized he was right. The nickname had never been about her flying skills, though those were certainly impressive. It had been an unconscious recognition of something more fundamental, the predatory instinct, the protective nature, the ability to strike precisely when and where needed most. Falcons made for life, she said quietly, remembering something else her grandmother had told her years ago. They're fiercely loyal to their family and their territory. They'll fight anything that threatens what they're protecting, no matter how big or dangerous. Hayes stood up, his expression thoughtful. Well, Lieutenant, it sounds like we're lucky to have you protecting our territory. The Pentagon can wait for their reports and recommendations. Right now, we have more missions to fly and more people to bring home safely. As the colonel walked away, Sarah looked around the table at the faces of the SEALs who had become her brothers in arms. These men understood sacrifice and dedication in ways that most people never would. They had accepted her not because she was different, but because she was exactly what they needed. The nickname Falcon would follow her for the rest of her career, but now she understood its true meaning. It wasn't just about her abilities as a pilot. It was recognition of her role as a guardian, a protector, a warrior who struck from above to keep others safe. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself worthy of the trust these men placed in her. But tonight, Sarachin felt a deep sense of peace and purpose that came from finally understanding who she really was. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the small ceremony room at Forward Operating Base Shank, wearing her dress uniform with the new captain's bars gleaming on her shoulders. The Distinguished Flying Cross hung heavy on her chest, but the weight felt appropriate, a tangible reminder of the responsibility she carried. The ceremony was smaller than she had expected, attended only by her squadron mates, the SEAL team she had supported, and a handful of senior officers. Colonel Hayes had insisted on keeping the event low-key, understanding that Sarah preferred substance over spectacle. As the official proceedings concluded, Sarah noticed an elderly Afghan man standing quietly near the back of the room. His presence seemed out of place among the military personnel, but something about his dignified bearing suggested he belonged there. Colonel Hayes approached him with obvious respect, and their brief conversation was conducted in hushed tones. After the formal ceremony ended and most of the attendees had dispersed, the colonel brought the old man forward to meet Sarah. "Captain Chen, I'd like you to meet Haji Abdullah. He's a village elder from the area where you conducted your rescue mission 6 months ago." The old man stepped forward with careful dignity, his weathered hands clasped in front of him. Through the interpreter that accompanied him, he began to speak in Pashto, his words carrying the weight of deep emotion. He says that 3 of the soldiers you rescued that day were from his village, the interpreter translated. Young men who had joined the Afghan National Army to protect their families and their homeland. Without your courage, they would have died far from home, and their families would never have recovered from the loss. Sarah felt a lump forming in her throat as the old man continued speaking, his eyes never leaving her face. He says that in his culture, when someone saves lives with such skill and bravery, they are honored with a special name. He has traveled 3 days to give you this name and to ensure that you understand its significance. Haji Abdullah reached into his robes and withdrew a small object wrapped in white cloth. He unwrapped it carefully to reveal an intricately carved wooden bird, its wings spread wide in flight. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every feather detailed with loving precision. He calls you Shaheen, the interpreter continued as the old man placed the carving in Sarah's hands. In Pashto, it means royal falcon. But, more than that, it represents someone who soars above earthly concerns to protect those below. In his village, they will tell stories about the Shaheen who came from the sky to save their sons. Sarah accepted the gift with trembling hands, understanding that she was receiving something far more valuable than any medal or commendation. This was recognition from the people she had sworn to protect, validation that her service had meaning beyond military objectives and political goals. The old man spoke again, and the interpreter smiled as he translated. He says that his grandfather once told him about Chinese resistance fighters during the Great War, brave women who fought from the mountains like eagles protecting their nests. He believes that the same spirit lives in you, connecting you across time and culture to all those who have stood guard against darkness. Sarah felt tears welling in her eyes as the full circle of her journey became clear. Her great-grandmother's legacy had reached across oceans and decades to touch the lives of people who had never heard of Taiwan or World War II. The courage that had sustained the Chinese resistance was now protecting Afghan villagers and American soldiers alike. After Haji Abdullah departed with the same quiet dignity with which he had arrived, Sarah found herself alone in the ceremony room, still holding the wooden falcon. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, having lingered after the official proceedings ended. "Pretty incredible," he said simply, nodding toward the carving in her hands. "It makes everything feel more real somehow," Sarah replied. "All the training, all the missions, all the close calls, they led to this moment. To understanding that what we do here matters beyond the immediate tactical objectives." Rodriguez nodded, his expression serious. "You know, when I first heard them call you Falcon, I thought it was just another pilot nickname. Cool but meaningless. Now I realize we were giving you a title you had already earned, just in a different war, in a different generation." Sarah looked at the wooden bird, its carved eyes seeming to hold ancient wisdom. "My grandmother always told me that our ancestors watch over us, guiding us toward our destinies. I used to think that was just comforting folklore. Now I wonder if there's more truth to it than I realized." "Does it change how you approach your missions?" Rodriguez asked. Sarah considered the question carefully. "Not the how, but definitely the why. Every time I climb into that cockpit now, I'm not just flying for the military or for my country. I'm flying for every person who has ever depended on someone else's courage to survive. That's a lot of responsibility, but it's also incredibly motivating." The conversation was interrupted by an urgent message over the base communication system. Another convoy was in trouble, this time in a valley 40 miles to the east. Enemy contact was reported, and immediate air support was requested. Sarah looked at Rodriguez with a grim smile. "Duty calls. Want some company on this one?" he asked. "My team is on standby, and we could use the practice working with the best pilot on base." Sarah appreciated the offer, understanding that it represented complete trust and confidence in her abilities. "Let's go bring some people home." As they walked toward the flight line, Sarah slipped the wooden falcon into her flight suit pocket, where it rested against her heart like a talisman. She thought about her great-grandmother climbing into the mountains of China with nothing but courage and determination. She thought about Haji Abdullah's 3 sons, alive today because someone had been willing to risk everything for strangers. She thought about all the missions still to come, all the lives yet to be protected. The Black Hawk helicopter sat waiting on the tarmac, its rotors already beginning to turn. Sarah's crew was completing their pre-flight checks with the efficiency that came from months of working together under the most challenging conditions. They looked up as she approached, and she saw in their eyes the same trust and confidence that had sustained her through every dangerous mission. Rodriguez and his SEALs climbed aboard with practiced ease, their equipment secured and their weapons ready. As the helicopter lifted off into the Afghan sky, Sarah felt the familiar surge of purpose that came with every mission. But now there was something additional, a deeper sense of connection to something larger than herself. She was no longer just Lieutenant Sarah Chen, helicopter pilot. She was the heir to a legacy of courage that stretched back through generations. She was the guardian of the sky, the protector of those who could not protect themselves. She was the Falcon, and she was exactly where she belonged. The radio crackled with coordinates and tactical updates as they flew toward their destination. Sarah acknowledged the information with professional calm, but inside her heart was soaring. Every mission was a chance to honor the trust that had been placed in her, to prove worthy of the names she had been given. Behind her, Rodriguez checked his weapons one final time and spoke into his headset. "Falcon, whatever happens down there, you get us home safe. We've got complete faith in you." Sarah smiled as she banked the helicopter toward the danger zone, the wooden Falcon pressing against her chest like a reminder of all the brave souls who had come before. "Roger that, Sergeant. Let's go be somebody's heroes." The Afghan mountains rose around them like ancient sentinels, and Sarah Chen flew toward destiny with the confidence of a woman who finally understood her place in the long chain of warriors who had chosen to stand between good and evil, between safety and danger, between life and death.